What is generational trauma? Have you ever wondered why certain patterns seem to repeat in your family? Maybe it's anxiety that shows up in multiple generations, or it's complicated relationships between parents and children that echo through time. Perhaps it's specific fears that don't seem to have any clear origin in your own life. These patterns might be signs of something called generational trauma. I'm Mike Stazak, licensed mental health counselor here at the Center, a place of hope. Today we're going to talk about one of the most important topics in mental health, how trauma can be transmitted across generations, and more importantly, how you can break these cycles. So what exactly is generational trauma? Generational trauma, it's also called intergenerational or transgenerational trauma. It refers to the psychological impact that gets transmitted across generations following traumatic events experienced by earlier family members. This phenomenon was first recognized among Holocaust survivors and their descendants. But since then, we've identified it in many populations affected by significant trauma. Here's what's fascinating. Generational trauma isn't just about having a difficult family history. It's about how traumatic experiences create ripple effects that influence family functioning, coping mechanisms, and even our biology across multiple generations. These effects can show up through behavioral patterns like specific parenting approaches or communication styles learned from our parents, through psychological transmission, unresolved grief, fear, or anxiety that shapes family dynamics. Through biological factors, emerging research on epigenetics suggests trauma may actually influence how our genes express themselves. And through socio-cultural influences, collective trauma experienced by entire cultural, ethnic, or religious groups. So where does generational trauma originate? It can come from several sources. First, there's historical trauma. Entire communities or populations can experience traumatic historical events that transmit psychological impact across generations. We're talking about things like colonial violence and displacement, slavery and its aftermath, genocide and ethnic cleansing, war and forced migration, and cultural oppression. Research with Native American populations, for instance, has documented how historical trauma related to land dispossession, forced relocation, and cultural destruction continues to impact mental health outcomes in current generations. Second, there's family-specific trauma. These are traumatic experiences affecting individual families that create generational patterns. Things like childhood abuse or neglect, domestic violence, sudden loss or grief, substance abuse, mental illness, incarceration of family members, or poverty and economic hardship. These experiences profoundly shape family dynamics, parenting styles, and communication patterns in ways that persist across generations. And third, there's collective societal trauma. Large-scale societal events can create widespread trauma that affects multiple families simultaneously. Economic depressions, natural disasters, pandemics like COVID-19, political upheaval, or terrorist attacks. The COVID-19 pandemic, for example, represents collective trauma with potentially long-term psychological consequences that may influence future generations. Do you recognize these patterns and signs in families and individuals? Now, recognizing generational trauma can be challenging because it's often normalized within family systems. You might hear phrases like, "That's just how we are," or "That's how I was raised." But let me share some specific patterns that may indicate its presence. Within families, You might notice difficulty expressing emotions or discussing certain topics. There might be unexplained family secrets or those don't ask topics. Similar mental health challenges might appear across generations, like depression or anxiety running through the family. You might see rigid family rules that don't serve a clear purpose, or parenting patterns that repeat despite conscious intentions to parent differently. There's often overprotection or hypervigilance around specific issues. Within individuals, generational trauma can show up as unexplained anxiety or particular phobias without a clear origin, strong emotional reactions that may seem way out of proportion to the trigger, persistent feelings of shame or unworthiness, identity struggles related to family or cultural background, difficulty forming secure attachments, physical health issues connected to chronic stress or feeling overly responsible for family members' emotional well-being. Research has found that adverse childhood experiences, often connected to generational trauma, are associated with significantly higher rates of depression, anxiety, substance use, and even physical health conditions later in life. The science, how trauma gets passed down. So how exactly does trauma pass from one generation to the next? The science here is fascinating. One of the most groundbreaking areas of research involves epigenetics, the study of how behaviors and environment can influence how genes function. Now, trauma doesn't change your DNA, but it may alter how genes express themselves. There was a remarkable study with mice that were exposed to traumatic stress. Researchers found changes in gene expression related to stress response in the offspring, even those offspring hadn't directly experienced the trauma themselves. In humans, research with Holocaust survivors and their children found similar evidence of epigenetic changes related to stress hormone regulation. This suggests the biological impact of extreme stress might actually be transmitted across generations at a cellular level. Perhaps the most well-documented pathway involves attachment relationships and parenting practices. When parents have unresolved trauma, they may struggle with emotional regulation during parent-child interactions. They might have difficulty responding appropriately to a child's emotional needs, setting consistent boundaries, or building secure attachment bonds. A longitudinal study tracking 3 generations found that mothers' attachment styles strongly predicted similar attachment patterns in their children and grandchildren. There's also what we call family systems. Families develop specific rules, roles, patterns of communication that maintain stability even when those patterns aren't healthy. Trauma can shape these systems by creating communication taboos. We don't talk about that. Establishing rigid roles. There's the responsible one, the troubled one. Developing unhealthy coping mechanisms like substance use or emotional avoidance, or setting implicit rules about emotional expression. Finally, there's neurobiological development. Early in life, experiences profoundly shape brain development, particularly in the areas of stress response. Children raised by caregivers with unresolved trauma may develop neurobiological patterns that mirror their parents' heightened stress reactivity, difficulty with emotional regulation, altered threat perception. Breaking the cycle, pathways to healing. Here's the good news, and I want you to hear it clearly. Cycles of generational trauma can be interrupted. The human capacity for healing and change is remarkable. With appropriate support, individuals can transform patterns that have persisted for generations. So how do we break the cycle? First, it starts with awareness and education. The healing journey often begins with recognizing patterns that may have roots in generational trauma. This might involve learning about your family history, including the difficult chapters, identifying recurring themes or challenges across the generations, recognizing how past trauma might influence your current functioning, and understanding the science of trauma transmission. Many of my clients experience profound relief in just recognizing that their struggles have context, that what they're experiencing isn't personal failure, but is part of a larger, understandable pattern. Second, processing personal and family trauma is crucial. This might involve individual therapy focused on trauma processing, family therapy to address systemic patterns, grief work related to family losses, or cultural reconnection for those affected by cultural trauma. Evidence-based approaches like trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, and internal family systems therapy have shown real effectiveness in addressing trauma patterns. Third, developing new patterns. Breaking generational cycles requires not just insight, but the development of new skills, emotion regulation strategies, healthy communication approaches, secure attachment behaviors, boundary setting, self-compassion practices, and stress management. For those who are parents, parenting interventions specifically designed to interrupt trauma transmission can be particularly valuable. Fourth, for communities affected by historical trauma, reconnection with cultural practices, values, and community can be powerfully healing. Research shows that cultural connection serves as a protective factor against the impacts of historical trauma. Finally, self-compassion and patience. Healing generational trauma is rarely quick or linear. It requires patience, self-compassion, and recognition of the complexity of these patterns. One of the most important things to remember is that generational trauma doesn't mean anyone is to blame. Previous generations did the best they could with the awareness and the resources they had. Healing isn't about assigning blame, it's about creating new possibilities. Let me leave you with this powerful truth. When someone breaks a generational cycle, they become what we call a transition person, a bridge between the patterns of the past and the possibilities of the future. If you recognize patterns of generational trauma in your life, seeking help isn't just for your own healing, it's a powerful gift to future generations. By doing this work now, you create the possibility of a different path forward. Here are your 3 key takeaways. First, generational trauma is real and scientifically documented. It can be transmitted through biology, attachment patterns, family systems, and neurobiological development. Second, you can recognize it by patterns that repeat across generations: mental health challenges, communication difficulties, unexplained fears, or rigid family rules. And 3, the cycle can be broken. With awareness, professional support, and commitment to change, you can transform patterns that have persisted for generations. Here at the Center, a Place of Hope, we are committed to supporting individuals on this journey of transformation. Our comprehensive whole person care approach provides the specialized care needed to address generational trauma and create lasting change. If you're concerned how generational trauma may be affecting your mental health, visit our website. The link is in the description below. We offer a trauma assessment and specialized trauma and PTSD treatment programs. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you recognized any patterns of generational trauma in your own family? What questions do you have about breaking these cycles? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. I would love to hear from you. If this video has resonated with you today, would you please subscribe for more evidence-based mental health content that honors the complexity of healing? Remember, your past patterns do not have to determine your future. You have the power to write a new chapter, not just for yourself, but for future generations.